This is the Jonesboro Cemetery. A friend of mine sent me the names of 3 headstones that I need to look for. Jack McCain, Luther Barnes, and Ona Mae Barnes. Now something connects these 3, but I'm not sure what it is yet. Now there are over 2,000 graves in this cemetery, and I'm not sure where these 3 are going to be located. All we can do is start looking. This is the headstone for Luther Barnes. It's William Luther Barnes. For some reason, this headstone has no birth date or death date. That's kind of odd. Now this is his wife, and I called her Ona Mae, but it's actually Ona Mae Barnes. She was born in 1896 and died in 1980. 1896, 1980. Now we need to find Jack McCain and see if that provides any clue. After searching for about an hour and a half, I finally found Jack McCain's headstone. Born in 1916, died in 1936. It still doesn't give me any clue as to why these 3 headstones are connected. That was a husband and wife. This was a younger man. Was there a love triangle? Was there something else? It's time for more research. I think I found part of it. Wow. Wow. We're going back to Jonesboro. When I was younger, Main Street in Jonesboro was where teenagers hung out on Friday and Saturday nights. Most of us had nothing better to do than to listen to loud music while we made a loop or cruised the strip, as we called it. But when we were tired of driving up and down the street, or when we were afraid that we wouldn't have enough gas to get home if we kept driving, we pulled into the parking spots all along Main Street and talked. For some reason, I don't remember why, we never parked here at the courthouse. It was as if the courthouse was watching over us all the time to make sure we didn't get out of hand. Through the years, businesses on the strip came and went, but the courthouse stood fast. It was as if it had always been here. But if we could go back in time 100 years, things would look a lot different. Take a look at this. Since the 1930s, the Jackson Parish Courthouse on Main Street in Jonesboro has served the citizens of the parish. In May of 1913, crowds gathered at the dedication ceremony for the first courthouse and jail built in Jonesboro. In the previous year, the parish seat was moved by popular vote from Vernon to Jonesboro. That's a whole other story. Soon thereafter, workers began constructing an imposing 2-story courthouse with a copper-domed tower which held clocks on all 4 sides. The cost of this courthouse was said to be about $100,000. 23 years later, in 1936, Jackson Parish was preparing for the January 21st election for state senator, state representative, district attorney, sheriff, tax assessor, coroner, justice of the peace, and other offices. The courthouse served as the polling place for Precinct 1 in Jackson Parish. On Thursday evening, January 16, 1936, 5 people were working in the courthouse. 34-year-old Ona Mae Barnes, an assistant home demonstration agent, was working in her office on the 2nd floor. Ona Mae's husband, 42-year-old William Luther Barnes, a World War I veteran and former Jackson Parish deputy who was working as a bookkeeper for the Federal Savings Association of Jonesboro, had just visited with his wife on the 2nd floor and was returning to work on the 1st floor of the courthouse. 35-year-old Aubrey Shows, an abstract man, was working in the clerk's office. 25-year-old Elbert Boyd of Baton Rouge was working in the farm agent's office. 44-year-old engineer A.J. Whitmore was in the basement looking up information on oil leases. At about 8:30 p.m., A.J. Whitmore had just finished gathering information from records in the clerk's vault in the basement and turned to leave. He reached up and pulled the switch to turn the light off in the vault. Without any sort of warning whatsoever, a thunderous explosion accompanied by a bright red flash rocked the courthouse. Witnesses said the ground in Jonesboro shook like an earthquake. The force of the explosion threw A.J. from one wall of the basement vault in which he was working to the other side of the enclosure, a distance of about 20 feet. A.J. was stunned by the blast. When he recovered, he tried to escape from the basement windows, but they were blocked by debris. He finally escaped through a ground floor window. He somehow escaped without injury. Elbert Boyd felt the floor fall out from under his feet and fell with the wreckage. "Somehow I got out," he told reporters, "but I know I wasn't blown out of the building. The first thing I knew of anything being wrong was when I heard the explosion and felt and saw the building collapsing and falling." He escaped without serious injury as well. Aubrey Showles was blown from the clerk's office into the street and rendered temporarily unconscious. He received cuts and bruises, but was not seriously hurt. Ona Mae Barnes suffered bruises on her face and body, a severe cut on her head, and her shoulder had a compound fracture. She was taken to a clinic in Hodge. Her husband, Luther Barnes, was missing. One survivor said, "There was a loud boom and immediately everything seemed to be falling." People from miles around, including citizens from the neighboring town of Hodge, heard the explosion clearly. Sheriff Neil Thomas said it sounded like a bomb. Buildings throughout the entire community shook. Dishes in homes rattled as if struck by an earthquake. The windows shattered in the jail adjacent to the courthouse and in the grocery store, as well as the Gatlin McDonald Motor Company across the street. H.M. Gatlin of that motor company was standing in front of the courthouse when, as he said, it went sky high. The courthouse was completely destroyed. Only the north and south outer walls were left standing. Citizens exited their homes and businesses to see what had happened. There was no smoke, no fire. Those who were inside of the courthouse were stunned at what they saw and rushed to the scene. Word spread quickly throughout the community. In an instant, the courthouse that had stood proudly on the site for 24 years was left in ruins. Immediately following the blast, state and federal authorities were notified and left for Jonesboro to begin investigating the explosion. 40 workers from the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC camp, enrollees of Camp Colvin under the leadership of Captain S.A. Hall, worked through the night and into the next day removing debris in search of survivors and recovering valuable books and records from the various offices. They brought tractors from Camp Colvin to aid in the removal of the heavy timbers and other debris. Nearly all of the town's 2,000 residents remained near the courthouse throughout the night. Governor O.K. Allen ordered 40 National Guardsmen from Ruston to help with crowd control and to recover the records from the voters' registration office. They arrived on the scene at about 2 a.m. With the help of the CCC workers, the National Guard recovered the undamaged records from the clerk's office and took them to a vacant vault in the Jackson Parish Bank. At about 4:30 in the morning, CCC workers were removing rubble from the area where the tax assessor's office was before the blast when they located the crushed body of Luther Barnes. It took them another hour to remove his body from the rubble. The explosion appeared to have centered around Sheriff Neil Thomas's office and the Registrar of Voters' office between the east and north entrances. Several of the local politicians expressed concern over the destruction of registration records and ballots for the upcoming election, which was set for the following Tuesday. When Lieutenant Governor James A. Noe heard of the catastrophe, He rushed to Jonesboro and offered his personal assistance as well as the assistance of his office. He reassured the citizens that the upcoming election would proceed as scheduled. Some citizens were concerned that the list of certified and qualified voters in the parish had been destroyed, but H.C. Comish, Assistant Secretary of State, said any ballots could be replaced in time for the election and the voters of Precinct 1 would vote at a substitute polling place. Many people believed the explosion was not an accident, but deliberate. They speculated that the courthouse had been dynamited to destroy the records in the office of the Registrar of Voters. "I am firmly convinced," Mr. Gatlin concluded, "that it was a bomb explosion." Sheriff Thomas said he didn't know if the courthouse had been deliberately blown up. The sheriff's department had no explosives in storage, and there were no explosives kept anywhere in the courthouse. Acting Mayor A.C. Holly told reporters that he doubted the dynamite theory because the campaign for the upcoming election had been quiet. There was no political feud, he said. Local hardware merchant Elmer Cox doubted the dynamite theory and said he believed accumulated gas caused the explosion. The accumulated gas theory was not accepted by many because the only gas intake in the building was a 2-inch pipe with a 2-ounce pressure, which led to the boiler room located in the center of the courthouse. The explosion, they pointed out, apparently occurred at the southeast corner of the building. Newspapers reported there was no fire connected with the explosion, which strengthens the belief that it was not due to gas accumulation. Red Hanna, a local plumber who was familiar with the pipes in the courthouse, concluded that the explosion was caused by an accumulation of gas from the small gas main which ran into the building. No traces of any type of explosives or dynamite were found at the scene. Other investigators reached the same conclusion as Red, that the blast was caused by the accumulation of natural gas. Surely, if there had been a natural gas leak in the building, people would have known about it. Most of us who have a gas stove or a gas water heater can easily recognize a gas leak by the horrible smell similar to rotten eggs, which can eventually cause headache. Why didn't any of the 5 people in the courthouse recognize this smell? Well, actually, they would not have known about the leak. The natural gas coming into the courthouse was odorless, tasteless, completely undetectable by humans. A little over a year later, March 18, 1937, another explosion happened which forever changed the smell of natural gas. Take a look at this newsreel about the New London School explosion of 1937.
It is with deep regret that we bring you these graphic, appalling scenes of one of the greatest tragedies in American history. Hundreds of school children and their teachers killed and mangled, some of them literally blown to bits, others crushed by falling masonry, when their new consolidated grade and high school in the center of the rich East Texas oil field was shattered by a terrific gas explosion. Had the blast occurred 10 minutes later, school would have been dismissed, and the death toll small perhaps. But it struck when only the lower grades and a few others had left, catching almost the entire student body in an inferno of flying debris and falling walls. There was no warning. Before the eyes of persons in the vicinity, including scores of parents assembled for a meeting in a nearby building, the schoolhouse, one of the finest rural structures in the country, suddenly burst asunder and collapsed. There's scarcely a home in the entire school district untouched by the disaster. A disaster caused, it is believed, by gas pockets which had collected in the school's sub-basement. In the long list of American catastrophes, this is one of the worst. The entire nation bows in grief.
The New London School explosion killed more than 300 people, most of them school children. It was a much-needed wake-up call. Following the school explosion, the federal government adopted laws which required gas companies to add a harmless chemical called mercaptan to give it its distinctive rotten egg smell. The only purpose of the smell is to warn people of a gas leak. So now we know what happened to Luther Barnes and what led to the explosion. What about Jack McCain here? Well, following the explosion, cleanup of the courthouse ruins continued into the following month. On February 4th, 14 WPA workers, including 19-year-old Jack McCain, worked to clear the site. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, Jack was working on the second floor when the floor fell out from under him. As he fell, one of the walls collapsed onto him. Jack was buried beneath a great weight of stone and brick. His legs were broken and his body was crushed. Other WPA workers dug Jack out and took him to the clinic in Hodge. Despite their best efforts, though, 4.5 hours later, Jack died. In December of 1936, workers began building a new courthouse on the site. After working on the new courthouse for just over a year, the building was completed in January of 1938. It's had some necessary additions and modifications over the years, but the core of the structure remains as it was when originally completed. Looking at it now, I can't help but think back to the majestic old courthouse that once stood here, or the explosion that destroyed it, and to poor old Luther Barnes and Jack McCain. You know, maybe we should look into erecting a state historical marker on the site so future generations will know their story and the story of the courthouse. What do you think? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.